did good things, and then also he struggled with some things. But I think in God's eyes, Wilson said he thought, but in God's eyes, it's obvious that David was well thought of, even though he was a sinful person who had things that he needed to repent of. But if is anyone looking at 1 Samuel 17, verse 45? That could be pretty close to. You got it, Chris? Okay, just read it out big and loud for us.
Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel."
Okay, so where was David's confidence? In God, in God. Nothing in between David and God. Now, one other, and then we're going to, you know, in this battle between, uh, who's the battle going to be between, even as we get into this, our second lesson today? Battle between who and who? That's right. Yeah, David and Saul. David, who would be king, and Saul, who was already king. So we need to look at why one prevailed and the other didn't. And if somebody would just, Pat, are you looking? Do you have 1 Samuel 18, verse 10? Could you read that? 1 Samuel 18, verse 10. Okay, now just skip down to verse 14 in that same chapter. Okay. Now, so why did David prevail? Well, he prevailed because God was with him. Really, because of the scripture that Chris read for us about how God enabled David to do what needed to be done, but that he had God in his heart. So that's kind of where we're going to begin now, to look at how David goes from being, well, what was he in just a couple of Sundays ago? He was sort of the least of the shepherds, wasn't he? He's who you sent when you needed everybody else doing something else. And I've had jobs like that where they sent me because they didn't need me doing anything else, you know. Uh, but now when he goes from a lowly shepherd until he becomes the king of Israel, on his way to greatness. Okay, uh, who do we need to mention as being sick? Or I was just talking to Shannon Newton there about John Silas. John Silas has been sick for 3 weeks, he says, and they're still trying to figure out what's wrong with him. Yes, ma'am. Okay, where is she going? Where is that going to be done? In Louisville. Okay. Well, we hope that goes well for her. That's always it's not as much a struggle as it used to be, but it's still a struggle for sure. Yes, Donnie. Yes, that's what. Oh, right. Well, we appreciate knowing that. I hate that that's happened. That's it. Yeah. Which way they're going to go. Yep. Yes. What Lanzo hears from Roger, and he's so he's in Bowling Green Hospital, Greenview Hospital. Yeah. Oh. Oh. Well. Why? Yeah. I didn't. Um, well, I had a little brother. Yeah. Nobody here was here much, and well, I don't see Neil over there, but in 72. My little brother was killed in a car wreck in 72. And for reasons that are kind of beyond all of us here, sort of, William was close to us and lived on the farm with us there. And he was sort of my next brother, sort of, which he and I talked about lots of things over the years. Um, but I hate to, that. Well, that's good. That's good. And she's a young person, relatively speaking. Um, so we certainly pray for all of them that are COPUS people as well as all the others that are sick. But I certainly didn't know about William. That's so. Anybody else that William died? Yep, yesterday. Well, he wasn't on the radio this morning, was he? I mean, yeah, yeah, yeah. He was about our age, Barry. He looked like I thought he's a year or two younger, but yeah, he graduated with Robbie, graduated with y'all then. Yeah. Well, the only yes, don't you? Yeah. Yeah. Yep. That's for sure. No, we they talked about it. Yes. Yeah. Certainly. Certainly. Anybody else? I don't want to. Well, we just in our family, and a lot of you would remember. I've got the two cousins that ride together. Some, uh, Linda and Betty, and Linda's in her early 70s, and Betty's in her she's about my age, really, just a little younger. Uh, but Linda's husband Robert died of COVID, and he had in Bowling Green funerals tomorrow at 2 o'clock. He had something else, a um, disease of like Lou Gehrig's disease, but except not as severe. He just entered the hospital for that for uh, what do we call that when you go to the hospital to get just retooled kind of. Uh, but he got COVID and died in a week. So and he hadn't taken the vaccines, even though the rest of the family had for whatever reason. Okay, anybody else? Anything else? Okay, if not, then Joey, you're going to lead our prayer and then read those first 17 verses of the 17th chapter.
Let's go to God in prayer. Dear most kind and gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. We thank you for all the many blessings of this life. Lord, I ask that you be with us now as we study a portion of your word. Lord, help us to always look into the Bible, to research and study on our own. Lord, I ask that you be with everyone that has been mentioned here this morning. Lord, be with those that have recently lost loved ones. Be with those that have got COVID. Be with those that are in the hospital caring for those. Lord, I ask that you to be with this country as we're going through this trying time with COVID. Don't seem to be that we can get rid of it. Lord, I just ask that you always look over us, that you guide, guard, and protect us. Most of all, I thank you for Jesus and his willingness to die on the cross for our sin. It's in his name that I pray. Amen. I'll be reading from 1 Samuel 21 through 17. David now fled from Nahoath in Ramah and found Jonathan. What have I done? He exclaimed. What is my crime? How have I offended your father that he is so determined to kill me? That's not true, Jonathan protested. You're not going to die. He always tells me everything he's going to do, even the little things. I know my father wouldn't hide something like this from me. It just isn't so. Then David took an oath before Jonathan and said, your father knows perfectly well about our friendship, so he has said to himself, I won't tell Jonathan. Why should I hurt him? But I swear to you that I am only a step away from death. I swear it by the Lord and by your own soul. Tell me what I can do to help you, Jonathan exclaimed. David replied, tomorrow we celebrate the new moon festival. I've always eaten with the king on this occasion, but tomorrow I'll hide in the field and stay there until the evening of the third day. If your father asks where I am, tell him I asked permission to go home to Bethlehem for an annual family sacrifice. If he says fine, you will know all is well. But if he is angry and loses his temper, you will know he is determined to kill me. Show me this loyalty as my sworn friend, for we made a solemn pact before the Lord, or kill me yourself if I have sinned against your father. But please don't betray me to him. Never, Jonathan exclaimed. You know that if I had the slightest notion my father was planning to kill you, I would tell you at once. Then David asked, how will I know whether or not your father is angry? Come out to the field with me, Jonathan replied, and they went out there together. Then Jonathan told David, I promise by the Lord, the God of Israel, that by this time tomorrow or the next day at the least, I will talk to my father and let you know at once how he feels about you. If he speaks favorably about you, I will let you know. But if he is angry and wants you killed, may the Lord strike me and even kill me if I don't warn you, so you can escape and live. May the Lord be with you as he used to be with my father. And may you treat me with the faithful love of the Lord as long as I live. But if I die, treat my family with this faithful love. Even with the Lord, even when the Lord destroys all your enemies from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a solemn pact with David, saying, may the Lord destroy all your enemies. And Jonathan made David reaffirm his vow of friendship again, for Jonathan loved David as he loved himself. Then Jonathan said, oh, I went too far, didn't I? Yep, that was the end. 17. I thought whenever I started reading it, I was like, oh, I didn't know going on 18.
No, thank you very much, Joey. And that's good. That's good reading, as they say. It gives us such a clear picture of what Jonathan was hoping to find out, but knew, or we know that he didn't find that out to be positive. He found out to be that Saul did it indeed have David in his crosshairs, as we would say, as he made sure he didn't become king, replacing him. Uh, let's go back just a second to page 15 in the book, lesson 3, David and Goliath. So what we have now, somebody tell me, which side of the Exodus are we on? Has the Exodus already happened, or is the Exodus yet to happen? It's already happened. That's right. So we're on the other side of the Exodus. So we have these countries or nations, small though they might be, and the Philistines were certainly a strong group of adversaries for Israel and for King Saul and for King Saul's army or armies. So, what do we have? What do you see as the picture here as we start lesson 3 in the book? And actually, we look at 1 Samuel 17, 31 through 37, and 40 through 51. But what was militarily, what was the picture then? Yeah. So you had the confrontation all set up, but really, it appears that what we lacked was a hero on the Israel side. Nobody had agreed to step up and to fight Goliath. Um, Now, what did Goliath have for him that made him such an adversary or such a his size? That's right. I think back then it wasn't how big was your tank or how big was your fighter jet, but it was how big you were and how you could fight. But just reading those scriptures that we did earlier, we know that David placed his strength somewhere else. So where did he place his strength? With the Lord, with God helping him, God making it possible for him to do these things. So when they went through the search for a king, they went through all of Jesse's children, and they got right down to they'd run out of children, and so they said, "Well, are there any more?" And he said, "Well, that's just the one little kid that we sent out to tend the sheep." And he said, well, that must be who it is, or at least that's who we need to consider. And so they did, and so we go through this David trying on the armor and all that, and he comes down to not being able to wear the armor, but he's fully willing to go out and tackle Goliath. And so we know that he used a slingshot, we would say, and he had the 5 stones, and he just used one, and he killed Goliath on the spot. So, a couple things about that. Um, how do you think Goliath actually died? Anybody have opinions about that? Yeah, with his own sword, or with his own. Yes, because he didn't have weapons, and I think that's right. If it wasn't his own sword, I'm mistaken there. But yeah, he killed Goliath after he hit him with the stone, and he probably was unconscious. Y'all all seen all these shows on television where they knock somebody unconscious and then they take and pull them up on an oak tree or something. But it appeared that was the case. Now there was another battle at that point. So who was the battle between after Goliath was killed, uh, and while we were still thinking about David as the person who killed him? Who attacked who? Yeah, the Israelites took to arms. Then they became a very aggressive army and really chased the Philistines back to their home bases, to the places that they had that they stayed encamped, I guess, when they weren't out in war zone. But anyway, so that was a great turning point in this battle. Now, how long that stood, it's hard to say, but at least we know that this is the beginning. We're still in the beginning of the United Kingdom, like it makes reference to here, even though in this next lesson, especially, we're getting the hint of a divided kingdom. But this is where David was successful killing Goliath. Goliath would never, or that kind of soldier would probably never be really prominent again. It's going to be at least a little more about technology as we started through the reigns of King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. Um, and then we move to this tricky point, and that's what we're going to move to now. So what was who succeeded a king when that king died? As a rule, the eldest son of that king. That's right. So is bound to have been a tricky thing because lots of these folks had wives uh, that were not prominent, and you didn't hear a lot about, and you had to really calculate their children. But that's where we're going to move to in this next lesson. So who would have King Saul wanted? And we're going to swap kind of pages right now. But who would King Saul wanted to have been king? Who does it appear he wanted to be king? Jonathan. And I think does Jonathan appear as the oldest son? I think. Uh, I believe that's the case anyway. Okay, what's the problem with Jonathan becoming king? No, that's the real problem. And he had not been uh, he had not been selected by God to be king. He was not in line like David had been, and David was making preparation to be king, but he was doing it with pretty humble beginnings. If you read our lesson, so any questions about David and Goliath? About what happened to Goliath? Why do we think, just as a passing point, why do you think the story of David and Goliath is so prominent in the book of 1 Samuel? What's the lesson there, you think? Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And then it didn't matter so much about your physical strength or even your technical strength, but it was who was fighting for you. And David showed very clearly that when God was with him, he could conquer great things, great people at least, or at least big people, if not great people. Okay, if there's not any other questions about that, let's move over to page 21 in the book, which is lesson 4, which Joey read 1 Samuel 20, 1 through 17. And what, after having heard Joey read the text there, and then we're going to go to our questions in just a second. That's what I want to. What was the confusion about that Joey read to us about in 1 Samuel 17? Yeah, that's right. So there was a debate about whether Saul was actually out to get David or whether he was not. Now, do we see much evidence of that debate or of that question in the Old Testament? I don't see much debate about it either. From when Saul figured out that God would cast a dim light on him and a bright light on David, that King Saul knew that it was inevitable. At least he thought it was going to be inevitable. If he didn't kill David, that David would become king. And so that was kind of the personal side of this. Now, what's unusual, I think, is that Jonathan and David became such close friends that they would appear to be just willing to die for one another here. Now, our book alludes to that, but what happened to King Saul and to Jonathan just within months or years of when we're reading about them here? They were killed. They were both killed in the same battle. So that took some of this pressure away. Did it make it easier? This is a hard question, I guess. Did it make it easier for David to become king? It made it a little easier, but he still had a lot to overcome, didn't he? We'll read about those different people who raised up, and that always reminded me a little bit of about Christ. What did Christ say about the Messiah? There will be others who come and say that they're the Messiah, that they're the promised one, the one prophesied about in Isaiah and all that. But they weren't, were they? They were not. You had 500 people who saw Christ after he was resurrected, but before he ascended to heaven. So I think that was the case here. David was going to be king, but it was going to take some work to get there. But the first thing it took was the faith that David exhibited in his ability to kill Goliath. So that's where we are. Um, any questions about the general flow of lesson 4 in the book here? This is a personal conversation, and that's another thing. Um, do we have many of these sort of personal, almost home life kind of situations in the Old Testament? I don't think you do. I think if you just look through the Bible, look through the Old Testament, I mean, you'll find certain stories about Elijah and different people where it's sort of personal to their lives. But this is kind of getting right into the lives of Jonathan and David, and how they reacted to David putting pressure on. And David would still have been a young person. Anybody got an estimate on how old David was when he died? I don't know the answer. I think something maybe around 70 or so, but not old like a lot of the Old Testament characters were. So he would have still been relatively young here. Anybody got nobody's Bible has an estimate of that? Yeah, it's not it wasn't an old person. Okay, so let's turn over to our questions here. And I know you might not have had a chance to look at these, not knowing which questions we were going to look at, but let's just start here. How is the choosing of a king different from the election of a president? What's the one term that you could put in there? Bloodline, heredity. That's right. That's right. And I think that was pretty straightforward here, and it was straightforward other places. What about the long lists of kings that you have for both Israel and Judah? Were all those kings good? No. Some of them were bad, and some of them were really bad. And once in a while there would be a good one. But this idea of following one king with whoever is by heredity in line for the kingdom was certainly dangerous. Didn't always work out well. Work out well either. That's
Even though we have the choice to pick whichever one we think is best for us,
no, that's
somehow seems to always end up with some fingers.
yeah. David when he died. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's not important, really. I think it's just, and I was just really making the point there that he would still been a young person, but we don't know exactly how old he would have been. But he was not going to, live a long, productive life, especially as king. Okay, and yeah, and there have been some bad people elected by the majority, and good people elected by the majority, and not to get into what does that really count on? What do you need when you have those kind of things happen? That's when people are always rewriting their constitution. You need to be able to follow your constitution and do what it dictates for you. But anyway, why did Abimelech in the book of Judges kill all the sons of Gideon? Yeah, he didn't want there to be a bloodline heir uh, to Gideon, and that's what he was looking at the fact that he would be replaced, and he was trying to make sure that there weren't any children of Gideon there to take the throne. Yes, I know. Before they ever had the opportunity to get there, which is interesting too, because what do we know about Gideon? Most of what we know about Gideon is positive. We don't know that there's other things that could have come to pass, and you'll find other accounts in the Old Testament, in the book of Kings and Samuel, and places where people were going to be king, but the whole family got killed, and they went some other route. Um, but anyway, what did David ask Jonathan when he fled from Naoth to Ramah? You see what? Yeah. What have I done to make your father mad? That's right. He wanted to know why uh, Saul had turned against, because what would you think Saul's original opinion of David would have been? His original opinion. It'd been good, wouldn't it? Because he had armies full of people, but who were unwilling to go out there and challenge Goliath, or at least didn't aggressively go out there. But David was willing to do that, and David not only killed Goliath, but he brought about the military victory that went along with that. Yes. Yes, that's no, that's right. That certainly stuck with him. That's always not far from his mind, and that's interesting. And do we see things like that today? Oh, we do. That's interesting how people take the wrong. These big time politicians. They just have to be careful about what they say about their opposition. You don't want to. I mean, be misquoted about your opposition, because that's what really Saul was doing here. I don't know if he was misquoting it, but certainly he was emphasizing uh, what he didn't need to emphasize. He needed to think about ruling over the people of Israel and Judah, I guess we would say too. What evidence did Jonathan use to convince David that he would know of any ill intent Saul had for David? And I don't know for sure about this one, whether I've got it answered right or not. Yeah, told him everything. Yeah, and he was going to use this trick with the arrows to indicate what. So they were real. This was almost Mission Impossible kind of stuff, where they were going to get the word out from from eventually to David, so David would know how to react. We're going to run out of time here. So what does David flee when he finds out what Saul thinks? Yes, he did, and he went. He was at this cave, but anyway, these people came to him. He said people who had overwhelming debt, and people and there were about 400 of them, I think. And so he had this little army that he could go around and fight guerrilla warfare, at least for a little while here. Okay, let's move on here. What did Paul argue? What did David argue Saul, Jonathan's father, knew that caused him to hide information from Jonathan? That's hard. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right, and I didn't put anything in there. Uh, but that, does everybody understand what Chris is saying? This relationship that David and Jonathan had was a block to what Saul wanted to do, uh, and as we know, down through time, Saul didn't really give up on killing David. He just got killed before he could kill David. Yeah. Yeah, I know. So it was certainly a difficult time for all of them right there, and it certainly made a difficult time for the nation of Israel, uh, and certainly weakened their strength, even though their strength was going to be good. They were going to be stout. Okay. How did Jonathan know Saul intended to meet with his top advisors in 3 days? New moon. That's right. They celebrated the new moon every month. We've had a full. Have you heard this? We've had the full moon in the last week. I don't know whether anybody went out to see it or not, but it was pretty prominent right after the sun went down, I think, on a couple of days. But this was a monthly thing that they had, and we read about lots of these kinds of holidays that were pretty regular that they uh, conducted as a celebration of a lot of natural things like the coming of the moon, even though they probably didn't know much more about the moon than that, really. But they knew that this was a place that, well, what did they know about that was important to this discussion? Was David going to be there? Yeah, he was supposed to be there. He had always been there. So what does that make you think about David in terms of Saul's kingdom? Yeah, he was a ranking member of the delegation, wasn't he? I mean, he came to all the big meetings around the square table, I guess. But he wasn't going to make this one for reasons we know that Saul didn't know. Uh, what excuse did David give for being absent when Saul met with his advisors? Yes, for his father was throwing a feast or giving a feast, um, commemorating um, whatever, really. Yeah. But anyway, that was an important thing he thought that could be used as an excuse. Um, when Jonathan came into the field where David was, what did he intend to do? What did he intend to do with the arrows he brought? So, what was he going to do with the arrows? That's right. Either before the boy or after the boy, and that was going to tell him whether Saul was after him or whether he had reconciled to David. Okay, who was to fetch the arrows Jonathan shot? What? The lad. That's right. Some of the Bibles say lad, some say servant. There's different terms there, but it was somebody who would have been subservient to either Jonathan or David, I guess, but especially Jonathan in this case. Okay. Um, what did Saul do to indicate to Jonathan that David was right to be concerned about his life? Yeah, what did he do? Threw a spear at him. Yeah, he actually threatened his life. So that's the situation now. And we're going to, next lesson that Al will have next Sunday goes further into this relationship between Jonathan and David and how they all reacted to Saul. Saul had a hard time ever being reconciled to the idea that he wasn't going to be king. Any questions or comments? I appreciate everybody's help this morning. Everybody have a good week. And we'll see.